The city was quiet, bathed in the golden glow of streetlights. FBI Chief Vanessa Carter had just finished a long day at a high-security government facility and was finally heading home. She preferred to drive herself. Years in law enforcement had made her appreciate the solitude of the open road. Dressed in business-casual attire, her badge and firearm securely tucked in her bag, she navigated the familiar route home. But as she approached a red light, she noticed something in her rearview mirror, flashing red and blue lights. Her eyebrows furrowed. Why was she being pulled over? She had done nothing wrong. With a sigh, Vanessa signaled and pulled over to the side of the road. Her instincts told her to remain calm, but she had been in law enforcement long enough to know how quickly things could escalate. A white police officer, Greg Thompson, stepped out of his squad car, adjusting his belt as he approached her window. His expression was firm, almost aggressive. He knocked twice on the glass. Vanessa rolled it down, keeping both hands visible on the steering wheel. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" Her voice was calm yet firm. Thompson's eyes narrowed as he looked her over. "License and registration. Now." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Thompson smirked. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for. Now step out of the car." Vanessa exhaled slowly. She had heard those words before. This was about to get interesting. Vanessa Carter didn't move. She kept her hands on the wheel, her expression calm but unwavering. She knew her rights. "Officer, I'd like to know why you're asking me to exit my vehicle." Her voice remained steady. Officer Greg Thompson let out a small chuckle, shaking his head as if amused by her resistance. "Don't make this difficult. Step out of the car now." His hand hovered over his holster, a silent but clear threat. Vanessa clenched her jaw. She had seen this tactic before: intimidation, escalation, control. She also knew that refusing could make things worse. Taking a deep breath, she slowly reached for her purse, making sure her movements were clear. The last thing she needed was for him to claim she was reaching for a weapon. "I'm stepping out, officer, but I expect a valid explanation." As soon as she opened the door and put one foot on the pavement, Thompson grabbed her arm roughly. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" he demanded. Vanessa met his gaze, refusing to let her frustration show. "I live in this city, officer. I work in this city. And I was on my way home." Thompson scoffed. "Yeah? Doing what? You don't look like you belong here." Vanessa exhaled slowly. She had dealt with racial profiling before, but this officer was pushing his luck. "Officer, I strongly suggest you take a step back and think carefully about what you're doing." Thompson laughed, a smug grin on his face. "Oh yeah? And why is that?" Vanessa stared at him, her expression unreadable. He was seconds away from making the biggest mistake of his career. Vanessa remained perfectly still, feeling the tight grip of Officer Thompson's hand on her arm. He had no idea who he was dealing with. "You're making a big mistake, officer," she said, her voice unwavering. Thompson smirked. "The only mistake I see is you not following orders. People like you always think you can get away with things." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "People like me?" Thompson scoffed. "Don't act dumb. Fancy car, expensive clothes, walking around like you own the place. But not tonight." His fingers tightened around her arm. Vanessa exhaled slowly, her patience running thin. "Officer, you've detained me without cause, used unnecessary force, and made assumptions based on nothing but my appearance. Do you realize what you're doing?" Thompson laughed. "Yeah, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm keeping this neighborhood safe." Vanessa glanced at his name tag. "Officer Thompson, last chance. Let me go." Thompson chuckled again. "And what if I don't? You gonna call a lawyer? File a complaint? Please, those never go anywhere. I own this street." Vanessa smirked for the first time. "You own nothing." Reaching into her bag with slow, deliberate movements, she pulled out a black leather badge holder and flipped it open. The words were bold and clear. "Federal Bureau of Investigation Chief of Operations." Thompson's smirk vanished instantly. His eyes widened as he looked between the badge and Vanessa's unshaken expression. He took a small step back, his face losing color. "You're the—" His voice trailed off. "That's right, Officer Thompson. I run the FBI." A silence hung heavy in the air. The officer had just destroyed his own career. Thompson's hands began to tremble as he stared at the badge in Vanessa's hand. His arrogance drained away, replaced by sheer panic. "You're the FBI chief?" he stammered, his voice suddenly uncertain. Vanessa tilted her head slightly, watching him squirm. "That's right, officer, and you just harassed and illegally detained a federal officer. What do you have to say for yourself?" Thompson took a step back, his confidence completely shattered. I didn't know." Vanessa cut him off. "Because you didn't bother to find out. You saw a black woman driving a nice car and assumed I was a threat." Another patrol car pulled up behind them, its red and blue lights flashing. Two officers stepped out, one of them being Sergeant Davis, who immediately recognized Vanessa. His eyes widened as he rushed over. "Chief Carter, is everything all right?" he asked, glancing between Vanessa and Thompson. Vanessa crossed her arms. "Not really. Your officer here decided to pull me over, profile me, and detain me without cause. I'd like to know if this is standard procedure in your department." Davis's face darkened as he turned to Thompson. "You pulled over the FBI chief? Are you out of your mind?" Thompson swallowed hard. "Sir, I didn't—" "Save it," Davis snapped, his jaw clenched in frustration. "Hand over your badge and gun. You're suspended effective immediately." Thompson's face drained of color. "Wait, sir, please." "Now," Davis ordered coldly. Thompson hesitated, then unbuckled his belt, placing his weapon and badge in Davis's outstretched hand. He glanced at Vanessa one last time, realizing he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Vanessa held his gaze. "Next time, think before you act. You never know who you're dealing with." With that, she turned back to her car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving behind an officer whose career had just crumbled in minutes. Sergeant Davis stood still for a moment, gripping Thompson's badge and gun. His jaw tightened as he let out a sharp breath, then turned to the other officer who had arrived with him. "Take him back to the station," Davis ordered. "I'll handle the paperwork myself." Thompson's face was pale, his lips slightly parted in shock. "Sir, please. This was just a misunderstanding." Davis spun around, his glare cutting like a blade. "A misunderstanding? You illegally detained the FBI chief. You put your hands on her. You harassed her for no reason other than the color of her skin. Do you have any idea what kind of storm you just started?" Thompson's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. He knew his career was likely over, but the weight of it was just now sinking in. The other officer grabbed Thompson's arm firmly. "Let's go." As Thompson was led toward the patrol car, his mind raced. He had been an officer for years. He had done things like this before, but never faced real consequences. Now, in a single moment, his career was slipping away. Sergeant Davis pulled out his phone and dialed the chief of police. He knew there would be an internal investigation, and the department would be under heavy scrutiny. Meanwhile, Vanessa Carter drove in silence, gripping the wheel tightly. Her phone buzzed on the dashboard, an incoming call from the FBI deputy director. She sighed before answering. "I heard what happened," the voice said. "Are you all right?" Vanessa glanced at the rearview mirror, the city lights flashing behind her. "I'm fine," she said, "but this isn't over." By the next morning, the incident had exploded across news channels and social media. A leaked video from a bystander had gone viral. Officer Thompson gripping Vanessa Carter's arm, her FBI badge flashing in the dim streetlight, and his shocked reaction as he realized his mistake. Headlines flooded the internet. Local officer harasses FBI chief in racial profiling incident. FBI chief illegally detained, police department under fire. Vanessa sat in her office, watching the news unfold. Her phone buzzed constantly. Calls from government officials, civil rights activists, and journalists, all demanding statements. Her assistant knocked and entered. "Ma'am, the mayor wants to speak with you. He's concerned about the department's response." Vanessa sighed and leaned back in her chair. "Patch him through." Seconds later, the mayor's voice filled the room. "Chief Carter, I just saw the footage. This is a disaster for the city." "No, Mr. Mayor," Vanessa replied, calmly but firmly. "It's a disaster for the police department. This isn't just about me. It's about a broken system." The mayor hesitated. "What do you want to do?" "I want a full-scale investigation into the department's racial profiling complaints. No more cover-ups, no more silence." There was a long pause. Then the mayor exhaled. "I'll make the call." As Vanessa hung up, she knew this was just the beginning. The world was watching, and she wasn't backing down. At the police headquarters, tension filled the air. Officers whispered in the hallways, nervously checking their phones as the scandal dominated every news outlet. Sergeant Davis stood in the chief's office, his hands clasped behind his back as he faced Chief Randall, the head of the department. Randall, an older man with graying hair, rubbed his temples. "This is the worst PR disaster we've had in years," he muttered. "A local officer harassing the FBI chief? Do you realize what this means?" Davis nodded. "I do, sir. That's why I suspended Thompson on the spot." The chief slammed a folder on his desk. "Not good enough. The city is demanding immediate action. The FBI is calling for a full review of our department. And now, the mayor wants me to speak at a press conference." Davis straightened. "What are we going to do about Thompson?" Randall sighed. "We have no choice but to fire him." Outside, Officer Greg Thompson sat in an interrogation room. His career flashed before his eyes. He had always gotten away with minor complaints, but this was different. This time, the world was watching. A door swung open, and an internal affairs investigator entered. "Officer Thompson," he said, flipping open a folder. "Let's talk about your history of misconduct." Thompson felt his stomach drop. This wasn't just about one mistake. They were digging into everything. Meanwhile, Vanessa Carter sat at her desk, reading reports of past racial profiling complaints against the department. This was bigger than just her case. It was time for change, and she was ready to fight for it. The police department was in turmoil. News outlets camped outside the station, reporters demanding answers. Protesters had gathered, holding signs that read "Justice for All" and "End Racial Profiling Now." Inside, Chief Randall stood at a podium, cameras flashing as he faced the press. "We take this matter very seriously," he began, his voice steady but tense. "Officer Greg Thompson has been placed on immediate termination pending further investigation." A reporter raised his hand. "Chief Randall, was this an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern?" Randall hesitated. He knew the truth, but admitting it meant exposing years of corruption. Before he could answer, the doors at the back swung open. Vanessa Carter entered, her presence commanding the room. The crowd fell silent. "I'll answer that," she said, stepping forward. "This is not an isolated incident. This is a systemic problem, and it's time for accountability." Gasps rippled through the room. Chief Randall shifted uncomfortably, but Vanessa continued. "I have in my hand a list of over 50 complaints against the department for racial profiling in the last 3 years, all dismissed without action." A murmur spread through the reporters. A journalist asked, "What's your next move, Chief Carter?" Vanessa's gaze was firm. "A federal investigation into this department, effective immediately." The room erupted into chaos, flashing cameras, urgent voices, and reporters scrambling to break the story. Officer Thompson, watching from a TV in the station, felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everything they had tried to hide. As Vanessa Carter walked out of the press conference, she could hear the buzz of reporters scrambling to cover the bombshell she had just dropped. A federal investigation. Those words sent a shockwave through the entire police force. Inside the station, Chief Randall slammed his office door shut, his face red with frustration. "This is a disaster," he muttered to Sergeant Davis. "The FBI breathing down our necks? Do you know what they'll find?" Davis crossed his arms. "Maybe it's time they do." Randall's eyes snapped to him. "Careful, Sergeant. You've been here long enough to know how things work." Davis took a step forward. "Yeah, and that's the problem. People like Thompson have been getting away with this for years, and now we've been exposed." Meanwhile, Officer Thompson sat in an interrogation room, his hands clenched into fists. Across from him, 2 internal affairs officers flipped through a thick file. "You've got quite a record, Thompson," one of them said, sliding photos and reports across the table. Dashcam footage, citizen complaints, excessive force reports. Thompson swallowed hard. "I didn't mean," the officer cut him off. "You didn't mean to get caught." Just then the door opened, and a federal investigator stepped in. He placed a thick folder on the table, labeled Department-Wide Inquiry. "We're just getting started," he said. Across town, Vanessa sat in her office, reviewing even more case files. The corruption ran deeper than she imagined. And now, she wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for justice. As the FBI investigation gained momentum, fear and tension spread through the entire police department. Officers whispered in the hallways, exchanging worried glances. files were being audited, body cam footage was being reviewed, and internal affairs was knocking on doors. Sergeant Davis sat at his desk, scrolling through emails, when an official memo popped up on his screen. His heart pounded as he read the subject line, "Immediate suspension orders, Officer Greg Thompson." Davis exhaled slowly. It was happening. Across town, Vanessa Carter watched the events unfold with cold determination. She had fought battles before, but this was different. This wasn't just about one bad cop. This was about an entire system that needed change. Her phone buzzed. It was Agent Rodriguez, one of her trusted colleagues at the FBI. "Vanessa, you won't believe what we found." She leaned forward. "Tell me." Rodriguez hesitated. "There's more than just racial profiling. We found evidence of false arrests, planted evidence, and even officers taking bribes. This goes deeper than we thought." Vanessa clenched her jaw. She had suspected corruption, but this was a full-blown scandal. Meanwhile, Officer Thompson was packing up his locker, his hands trembling. His career was over. Other officers avoided eye contact, some whispering under their breath. As he stepped out of the station, reporters swarmed him. "Officer Thompson, do you have anything to say about your suspension? How do you respond to the accusations against you?" Thompson pushed through the crowd, his face pale. His fall from power had been swift and brutal. And Vanessa? She wasn't done yet. Vanessa Carter sat at her desk, a mountain of files spread before her. The evidence her team had gathered was damning, dozens of cases where Officer Thompson and his colleagues had abused their power. But this wasn't just about Thompson anymore. It was bigger. She tapped her fingers on the table, deep in thought. This needed to go public. Her phone buzzed. It was Agent Rodriguez again. "Vanessa, we've got enough to bring this whole department down. Are you ready to go public?" Vanessa inhaled sharply. "Yes. Let's do it." That evening, major news outlets received an anonymous tip. Within hours, headlines flashed across every TV screen and social media platform. FBI investigation uncovers police corruption scandal. High-ranking officers implicated in racial profiling, false arrests. FBI Chief Vanessa Carter exposes systemic abuse. Meanwhile, inside the precinct, chaos erupted. Officers who had turned a blind eye were now panicking. Internal Affairs began conducting interviews, and several high-ranking officials were already facing suspensions and potential criminal charges. As for Officer Thompson, his disgrace was complete. His face was plastered on every news station, and his name became synonymous with corruption and racism. Sitting in his dark apartment, he watched the news unfold. His hands clenched into fists. His career was over, his reputation destroyed. And Vanessa? She had just taken the first step in dismantling a broken system. The next morning, Vanessa Carter stood before a packed press conference. Reporters filled the room, cameras flashing as they waited for her statement. The entire country was watching. She stepped up to the podium, her voice calm but firm. "For too long, corruption and racial bias have plagued law enforcement. But today, we take a stand." She laid out the FBI's findings, evidence of unlawful detainments, excessive force, and blatant racial discrimination. She didn't just expose Officer Thompson. She exposed the entire system that allowed officers like him to thrive. As she spoke, people across the nation reacted. Social media erupted in discussions. Citizens demanded change. Protesters gathered outside the police department, holding signs that read, "We demand justice. No more racial profiling. Accountability now." Meanwhile, inside the police precinct, the fallout was swift. The police chief, under immense pressure, announced a full-scale reform of the department. Several officers, including Thompson, were officially fired and faced criminal investigations. Thompson sat in a cold interrogation room, his head in his hands. He never imagined his career would end like this, but it was too late. He had made his choices. Now he had to live with them. As Vanessa watched the news later that evening, she felt a sense of satisfaction. The fight wasn't over, but today was a victory, one that would echo through the halls of justice for years to come. Justice had been served. This story isn't just fiction, it reflects real struggles that many people face every day. Racial profiling and abuse of power are issues that demand our attention. Change starts with awareness, accountability, and action. What can you do? Speak up against injustice when you see it. Support organizations fighting for police reform and equal rights. Stay informed and educate others about racial bias in law enforcement. Use your voice on social media to spread awareness. If this story moved you, share it with others. The more people who understand these issues, the closer we get to a world where justice is truly equal for all.